Hey guys, this is Thomas over here, nursemoneytalk.com. Today I'm answering a question from one of you. The question comes from a viewer who is upset because her daughter was expelled from her nursing program just before graduation. She is now wondering if the school can actually do that. Here's the question. Is it legal for my daughter to get kicked out the last 2 days of nursing school before graduation? So that's the question, and the answer is coming up. But before I get into that, I just want to mention that if you have questions that you'd like to ask, you can go to nursemoneytalk.com/ask to write your question or also to record your answer. And who knows, it just might be answered here on the channel. All right, let's get into it. The first thing I want to mention is that really, I'm not an attorney. Questions involving legality are really better suited for an attorney who practices in your area because, well, laws can vary widely from one jurisdiction to another. So, for legal matters, you really shouldn't just take advice from a random dude on YouTube. But with that said, I can definitely speak from my own experience. And based on that, I do believe it's possible for students to be dismissed during their program, even if it's close to graduation. Could be at the beginning, could be at middle, could be, right before the end, whatever. And depending on the reason, it could very easily be legal. And I guess depending on what the reason is, it could also be not legal, but that's neither here nor there. But really, what I want to do for the rest of the time is to dive into not so much the legality, if you will, because once again, as I mentioned earlier, I do think that that's kind of better suited for an attorney depending on what the reasons are. But I do want to discuss some of the common reasons I've seen and I've heard of why students do get dismissed from their nursing program at any time. Also, there wasn't really much detail given. It's hard to kind of form more of a specific conclusion of what the situation is. Also, this list is not really in any particular order. And also just note every program's different, though really for most, if not nearly all of this, I'm not really sure it would really vary that much from program to program. But either way, let's just get into it. The first one I'm going to discuss would be a student who fails a predictor exam. So when I was in nursing school, at the end of the program, we had to take a predictor exam. The one we had to take, I'm pretty sure it was the ATI predictor exam. And essentially, it was kind of like this major standardized test that was supposed to help predict our likelihood of passing the NCLEX exam. For the predictor exam that I had to take at the end of my program, I believe we were supposed to score at least, I want to say it was a 90 to pass the program. This score was also meant to kind of correlate to like how strong or how likely you were of actually passing the NCLEX. Now, of course, there are many other types of tests kind of similar to this, and I've definitely have heard of students in other programs who have had to, whether it's taking the ATI predictor or taking something else that's kind of similar to that at the end of their program, and they're supposed to make a certain score to actually progress. And of course, if you don't achieve the score, whatever that required score is, then you could potentially be dismissed or not allowed to graduate. Now, the next one is academic misconduct. Now, academic misconduct is another significant issue that can result in dismissal from a nursing program. And it's not really limited to nursing school per se. It honestly kind of applies across all educational disciplines. And academic misconduct can take many different forms, including cheating on exams. This might involve obtaining answers in advance or taking a monitored test at home and still being found in some kind of violation. For example, whenever I had to take some exams at home for my nurse practitioner program, we'd use something, I think it was called like RP, was it art? Remote Proctor Now or Remote Proctor, it was something like that, where it locks down the computer. You're supposed to use a webcam, scan your rooms, do all of this scan ordeal. Like really just to take this test, it was like a 5-10 minute ordeal just to kind of prep for it, clear out everything just so they can make sure that there's no cheating, nothing on the walls or anything like that. Because, they do end up going back and watching the entire video, or I'm sure it's not the faculty, but they probably send it off to somebody to actually watch the entire video and make sure that your eyes was on the screen and doing what you're supposed to. And that's kind of what I mean where you can be in violation of that. Now, additionally, academic misconduct can also encompass plagiarism in written assignments, and many students have faced obviously serious consequences for plagiarism. And really, the other kind of evolution of plagiarism in today's world is where tools like ChatGPT and generative AI that's all over the place. And so now you're starting to see an increasing amount of students getting in trouble for using these technologies in their assignments. So real quick, if you're finding this video helpful, I would really appreciate a thumbs up. It truly does help me by showing the YouTube algorithm that you found value in the video, which means it will be presented to more nurses just like you who could benefit from this information. Thank you so much for your support. Now let's get back into the main content. Another major issue is displaying unprofessional behavior. Really, this section is kind of all encompassing, right? So this can range from attendance problems such as not showing up for clinicals or consistently arriving late for clinicals, being rude in your clinical rotations. It can also include being disrespectful to faculty at your nursing program. This could also be being disrespectful to staff at your clinical site as well. Or also a big one are rude text exchanges, whether that's text messaging or email exchanges with staff or other students. That has also gotten people in trouble. Essentially, you're looking at behavioral issues. These are kind of all encompassing, and really a lot of these are kind of self-explanatory. Now, the next one, I'm really looking at HIPAA violations. I briefly touched on this earlier, but I think it's important to kind of pull this out and really highlight this because a lot of students and nurses actually get in trouble for this. But specifically for students, sharing patient information with individuals who they don't need to know. And another big one is sharing information on social media. Guys, you have to be careful about social media. But I've written other articles and videos on this, so I'm not really gonna kind of belabor this point a little too much. Now, another reason I'm gonna point out, I'm gonna put this as falling into the failing to meet program requirements. And this could involve not passing essential checks. So this could be background checks or skill assessments. As I'm thinking about it, I vaguely remember when I was in school that we had to achieve a certain percentage on a significant dosage calculation exam. If you didn't meet that requirement, you typically had one more chance. And then if you didn't pass, you would be dismissed from the program. You were done at that point. I think that was how that one went. Another one I do remember was a practicum checkoff. Like, I think this was during, this one in particular I'm thinking of, I think this was during was it my first semester, Foundations of Nursing, something like that. We had major practicum checkoff at the end, and you had to meet a certain specific passing standard. And how that one went is you had your first attempt. If you didn't meet it, you had a second attempt. And then if you didn't get it at the second attempt, you would then be dismissed from the program. On top of that, I think it's also important to note, when we're talking about meeting certain standards, that many programs, if not pretty much all, require students to maintain a certain GPA to either remain in the program and or to graduate. Therefore, I could see a situation where a student would not be allowed to progress or pass if their GPA fell below a certain threshold. So this brings me to this general conclusion as I'm just kind of thinking out loud. This question, it kind of gives me a little bit of a pause because my feeling is that most schools don't really have an incentive to fail students. On the other hand, I actually think they have an incentive to keep passing them. First of all, not progressing students means they're not paying tuition, which results in lost revenue. It might sound strange for me to say this, but let's be honest. Education has a business aspect to it, And there is, of course, an incentive to keep students progressing. I'm not suggesting that a program or school would pass someone who is clearly unsafe and unfit. However, we need to understand where the incentives lie. Additionally, schools typically record and report their pass fail rates. There just doesn't seem to be much incentive for programs to fail students, at least not from my perspective. If you have other thoughts on this, please share them in the comment sections below. I say all of this with this conclusion that I would probably go in and gather more information specifically on what happened if you don't already have it. Why was your daughter dismissed from the program? And it would be important to review the relevant policies that your particular program has in place. There is likely a procedure in place for appealing such situations, and depending on the circumstances surrounding it, there may be options available. If at the end of the day she was expelled from a program, keep in mind that it's not necessarily the end of the road for her in terms of her goal of becoming a nurse. I actually do believe that I have an article and a video on what to do after being dismissed from a nursing program. I'm pretty sure I do. You can find it by going to nursemoneytalk.com. Probably the easier way to do this is go to google.com, bing.com, Yahoo, whatever search engine you're doing, and just type in, what do I do after failing a nursing program? And then type in nursemoneytalk.com in there, and it should probably lead you to the right page within like the first one or two links. But that's all I have for this particular video. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up button, and I'll catch you very soon in that next video.